I had just taken the roast out of the oven when my son said it. Not loudly, not with any particular edge, just casually, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. "Dad, how come you're still in that apartment? I thought Mom said you were moving into the house Elaine bought you." The kitchen went quiet. Not the whole house, just the kitchen. My daughter-in-law kept stirring something on the stove. My grandkids were still arguing in the other room about something involving a video game. But in that kitchen, between the three of us adults, the air changed. I looked at my son. He wasn't looking at me. He was reaching past his wife for the pepper grinder, completely unaware of what he'd just dropped on the floor between us. Then I looked at my daughter, Elaine, who was standing at the counter with a dish towel in her hands and an expression I had never seen on her face before in 63 years of being her father. She wasn't angry. She wasn't caught off guard. She looked like someone who had just heard a sound they'd been dreading for a very long time, and now that it was here, they didn't know whether to run or stand still. She chose to run. She said, "Excuse me," in a voice that didn't sound like hers, walked around the island and disappeared down the hallway. I heard the back door open and close. My son finally looked up. "Dad," he said, "what just happened?" I put the roast down on the trivet, and I said, "I think I need to sit down. Let me go back about 2 years, because this story doesn't make sense without the beginning, and the beginning starts the way a lot of family stories do, with something that seemed like a blessing. I'd been retired for about 4 years at that point. My wife, the kids' mother, had passed away 7 years earlier from a stroke. Sudden, no warning, gone in 3 days. That was the hardest thing I'd ever survived. And I say survived deliberately because there were months afterward where I wasn't sure I would. We'd been married 31 years. She was the one who managed things. The house, the schedules, the relationships. I was the one who worked. After she was gone, I learned just how much of our life she'd been holding together. I sold our house in Oakville about 18 months after she passed. Too big, too quiet, too full of her in a way that was breaking me slowly. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Burlington, which suited me fine. I'm not a man who needs a lot of space. I have my books, my woodworking tools, my Tuesday poker nights with the same 3 men I've known since we were all working at the same plant in our 30s. The apartment was fine. But my daughter, Elaine, the younger of my 2 kids, had a different idea. Elaine is 41 now. She's bright, always has been. She went to Ryerson for business, worked her way up in property management, knows real estate the way I know a good piece of maple wood. When she came to me about 3 years ago and said she wanted to buy me a house, I told her absolutely not. She insisted. She said she'd been putting money away specifically for this purpose since her mother died. She said it would give her peace of mind knowing I was in a real home and not a rental. She said there was a bungalow in Grimsby, near the lake, 1 floor, everything I'd need, good bones, and she wanted to buy it for me as a gift. I said no 3 times. She asked 4. On the 4th time, she sat across from me at my kitchen table and said, "Dad, please, let me do this one thing. Mom would have wanted you to have a proper home." And I don't know if it was what she said or the way she said it, but I gave in. She took me to see the property in October. It was everything she'd described. Small, manageable, a good woodworking shed out back, walking distance from the water. I stood in the backyard and thought, yes, I could be happy here. She squeezed my arm and said, "I'll take care of everything." And then she did, or so I thought. The months that followed were full of reassurances. Every time I asked about the timeline, she said things were progressing, paperwork, inspection delays, title issues. At one point, she told me there'd been a problem with the previous owner's estate, and the sale was on hold. I offered to come with her to the lawyer's office, and she said there was no need, she had it handled. By the time 18 months had passed, I'll be honest with you, I'd stopped asking. I was still in the apartment. I assumed the deal had fallen through, and Elaine was embarrassed to tell me. I didn't push. That's how I am. I don't like making my children uncomfortable. Maybe that was my mistake. My son, Ryan. He's 45, lives in Hamilton with his wife and their 2 kids, had no idea any of this was going on. He knew Elaine had mentioned buying me a house at some point. He didn't know the details, hadn't followed up. We don't talk about money in this family, or rather, we didn't used to. The dinner where all of this surfaced was a Sunday roast in early March at Ryan's place. Nothing special, just the kind of Sunday we used to have more often before everyone got busy. I brought my apple cake. His wife had made soup. Elaine arrived a bit late, seemed distracted, but nothing that flagged anything for me. Until Ryan made his offhand comment about the house, and Elaine walked out the back door. Ryan looked at me, and I looked at him, and I told him, as calmly as I could, that I was not, in fact, living in any house, that I was still in the apartment in Burlington, that I had been for the past 2 years since Elaine had promised to handle the purchase. He stared at me for a long moment. "She told me it was done," he said. "At Christmas I asked her how the house thing was going, and she said it was all sorted. You were just taking your time deciding when to move." I didn't say anything to that. I didn't have anything to say. Ryan went to find his sister. I stayed at the table. His wife, a kind woman, always has been, didn't ask me a single question, just quietly set a cup of tea in front of me and went to check on the kids. I've always been grateful for people who know when to give you silence. Ryan came back about 10 minutes later. Elaine was behind him, and her face was red and raw, in a way that told me she'd been crying outside, in the cold, in her coat she hadn't taken off since she arrived. She sat down across from me. Ryan stood in the doorway, and Elaine told me the truth. The bungalow in Grimsby had been purchased. She had bought it, used the money she'd saved, put the deed in her own name temporarily, she said, intending to transfer it to me once some things settled down. Those things were her husband. Her husband, a man named Perry, who I had liked well enough over the years. Quiet, steady, worked in insurance, had been diagnosed with colon cancer 14 months before that Sunday dinner. Stage 3, caught late, aggressive treatment required. The kind of treatment that isn't covered, not all of it, not the specific drug protocol his oncologist wanted to try, not the extended home care, not the second opinion in Toronto that cost more than I want to write down. Perry was in remission now, fragile, still recovering, but remission. Elaine had refinanced the Grimsby bungalow 8 months after purchasing it. She had used the equity to cover what the provincial health plan wouldn't. She had not told me. She had not told Ryan. She had told no one, just carried it. And when Ryan had asked her at Christmas whether the house was sorted, she had said yes, because she couldn't say the truth. Which was, "I used it, and I don't know how to fix this yet." She sat there telling me all of this while I looked at my hands on the table. When she finished, the room was quiet. Ryan spoke first, and I will tell you he did not handle it well in that moment. He was angry, and he said some things that weren't wrong exactly but weren't kind either. He said she should have asked. He said she should have come to one of us. He said he didn't understand how she could look me in the face for over a year, knowing what she'd done. Elaine didn't argue with any of it. She just sat there and took it, which I think was worse in a way, watching her take it. I let Ryan finish, and then I asked him to please go check on the children. He looked at me. He started to say something. I said, "Ryan, please." He went. Elaine looked at me like she was waiting for the second wave. She'd been bracing for it since she sat down, I could see that. Her whole body was tensed up like a person waiting for something to hit them. I said, "Perry is in remission." She said, "Yes." The treatment worked. The oncologist thinks so. They'll keep monitoring, but yes. I nodded. I looked out Ryan's kitchen window. It was a gray March afternoon. the kind of flat gray that sits over southern Ontario for weeks at a time, the sky and the ground almost the same color. I said, "You should have told me." She said, "I know. I would have helped." She started to cry again quietly. "I know that too. That was the problem, Dad. I knew you would have. And you've already lost so much and you were finally starting to be okay again, and I couldn't." She stopped. Tried again. "I told myself I'd fix it before you ever had to know. I thought I had more time. This is the part of the story where I'm supposed to tell you what I said next. And I've thought about it many times since, wondering if I handled it the right way or just the familiar way, which isn't always the same thing. What I said was, you can't keep a secret like that and call it protection, Elaine. That's not what that is." She didn't answer. "You made a decision about what I could handle without asking me. And you let me believe something that wasn't true for over a year. That's not protecting someone. That's managing them." "I know," she whispered. "And Perry, does he know?" The pause before she answered told me everything. "He knows I refinanced," she said carefully. "He doesn't know where the original money came from." I sat with that for a minute. "So you've been carrying this alone?" "Yes." I thought about my wife then. I thought about what she would have done sitting where I was sitting. I knew the answer before I'd finished thinking the question, because I knew her, and I knew she would have reached across the table before Elaine even finished talking. She was faster with forgiveness than I am, always was. But I also knew she would have said what I had just said, about the difference between protecting someone and managing them. She believed in honesty the way some people believe in religion, absolutely without exception, even when it cost something. I asked Elaine to stay for dinner. She looked surprised by that. Maybe she'd expected me to leave, or to ask her to. I told her I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine, and I wasn't going to. I told her we were going to have a real, honest conversation about what came next, about the money, about the property, about Perry, about all of it, but that it didn't have to happen that night, and that her eating a meal with her family before driving home alone to her sick husband seemed more important than any of the rest of it right now. She nodded. She couldn't speak. Ryan came back into the kitchen eventually, still tight-jawed but quieter. I told him to slice the roast. He did. We ate. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't the kind of dinner you'd want to put in a frame. But we were all at the table, and I think that mattered. In the weeks that followed, Elaine and I had several conversations, long ones. She came to my apartment on a Saturday in April, and we sat with coffee and talked for 3 hours, more honestly than we had since her mother died. She told me things about the last 14 months that I hadn't known, how frightened she'd been, how isolated, how she'd convinced herself that carrying it alone was somehow more noble than burdening anyone else. I told her that isolation isn't noble, that it's a habit that can hollow a person out. I told her about the 18 months after her mother died, when I'd done exactly the same thing. Carried everything alone, refused to tell my kids how bad it actually was, told myself I was protecting them. What it actually did was prevent them from being able to help me and prevented me from feeling anything except the weight of it. She hadn't known how bad those 18 months had been. I'd kept it from her. She looked at me when I told her that and said, "We're the same kind of stubborn, aren't we?" I said, "I'm afraid so." The Grimsby bungalow is still in Elaine's name. We've talked about what to do with it. She wants to sell it and give me the proceeds, which would be a fair amount at today's prices. I've told her I'm in no rush, and that I mean it. What matters more to me right now is that she's not drowning, that the bills are paid, that Perry is recovering, that she's sleeping at night. Ryan took longer to come around. He's more like his mother in some ways. Slower to forgive, but once he does, he means it. He and Elaine had their own conversation in May without me, which I think was the right thing. I don't know exactly what was said. I didn't ask. What I do know is that by summer, The four of us, Ryan, his wife, Elaine, and Perry, who was thinner than he used to be but smiling more, were all at my apartment for a barbecue on the long weekend. Ryan brought beer. Elaine brought potato salad. Perry stood at the railing on my small balcony and watched the parking lot below, with the expression of a man who is glad to be standing anywhere at all. I'm still in the apartment. I like it well enough. Maybe I'll move eventually, maybe I won't. The apartment is fine. I told you that at the beginning, and I meant it. What I didn't have at the beginning was the truth, and whatever it cost to get here, and it cost something, I won't pretend otherwise, I'd rather know than not know. I'd rather have a daughter who finally told me the truth, sitting at my table, than a story that stayed tidy and hollow right up until the day it didn't. The roast, for the record, was good. I always make a good roast, even on the worst days. The food is usually fine. That's something, at least. I keep thinking about that moment at the table, not the dramatic part, not Elaine walking out, but the part after. When Ryan came back in, and I asked him to slice the roast anyway. When his wife set a cup of tea in front of me without saying a word. There's something in those small moments that tells you more about a family than any of the big ones do. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, and I'll be honest with you. I don't think what Elaine did was simple. It wasn't just a bad decision made once. It was a series of them, each one building on the last, each one requiring the next to keep the whole thing standing. That's how these things work. You make one choice you're not proud of, and then you make a slightly worse one to protect it. And somewhere along the way, you've built something you can't see your way out of anymore. I know how that happens. I've done a smaller version of it myself. What I kept coming back to in the weeks afterward was the question of what it actually takes to be honest when honesty costs you something real, not the easy kind of honesty, telling the truth when it doesn't matter much either way, but the kind where you know that saying the words out loud is going to change how someone looks at you, possibly forever. That takes something most of us have to learn the hard way. Elaine learned it the hard way. I hope she carries that now. The thing about carrying a secret the way she carried hers is that it requires you to get smarter and smarter about the wrong things. You start managing information instead of living with people. You start measuring every conversation for what it might cost you. That's an exhausting way to love someone, and I think it wore her down in ways Perry's illness alone wouldn't have. She was fighting on two fronts, his recovery and the wall she'd built around it. When the wall finally came down, I think part of her was relieved, even in the middle of the worst of it. What I said to her that afternoon about the difference between protecting someone and managing them is something I meant and still mean. Real care for another person leaves them their full dignity. It doesn't make decisions on their behalf about what they can handle. I've been guilty of that too, especially in the years after their mother died. I kept so much from Ryan and Elaine because I told myself I was sparing them. What I was actually doing was deciding for them. We're the same kind of stubborn, Elaine and I. That line she said still sits with me. What I hope she took from all of it, what I genuinely believe she's working toward now, is that real strength isn't in the carrying alone. It's in knowing when to put something down and ask for help. Perry is recovering. The bills are paid. And she's not alone with it anymore. That matters more to me than the house ever did. I'm still in the apartment. The roast that night was good. Some things stay simple, and I'm grateful for them.